"Get on my horse now." That's what the giant Apache told her. Folks thought he was rescuing a lost mother with a baby. But what he did next shocked everyone. See, that woman wasn't just some stranded settler. Her dead husband left her a map, marking a spring so pure it could save an entire tribe, or make a railroad man rich beyond counting. But the lawmen didn't care. They wanted her baby taken, her claim buried, and that Apache scout out of the way. Only problem? He wasn't backing down. Not for the army, not for the railroad, not even for the preacher who begged him to stay quiet. Now, with the church doors barred and guns in the street, one man stands between a mother's last chance and the men who'd rather see her disappear. Every story begins with a heartbeat. Tell me, where are you in the world today? And how are you really doing? Your words make this space feel more human. The winter wind whistled through the barren branches as Nantan guided his horse along the supply train's path. His keen eyes scanned the horizon, searching for signs of water in the harsh landscape. The Apache scout's broad shoulders were wrapped in a thick wool blanket, his long black hair tied back with a leather strip. Behind him, the creaking wagons of the Army supply train moved at a crawl through the thin mountain trails. Nantan pulled his Mustang to a halt, his attention drawn to a group of buzzards circling in the distance. The dark birds wheeled lazily above a cluster of scrub brush, their presence a warning sign in the desolate terrain. Something wasn't right. He turned his horse toward the circling birds, leaving the supply train behind. As he drew closer, his trained ears caught a sound that made his heart skip. A weak cry, barely audible above the wind. Not the cry of a wounded animal, but the distinct wail of a baby. Through the tangles of dry brush, he spotted a bundle of fabric. His breath caught in his throat as he dismounted, approaching carefully. There, half buried in dead leaves and frost, lay a white woman. Her face was pale as milk, her lips tinged blue from the cold. In her arms, wrapped in a threadbare quilt, was a tiny infant. The woman's eyes fluttered open as his shadow fell across her face. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "My baby." Without hesitation, Nantan knelt beside her. "I'm here to help," he said, his voice gentle but firm. The woman, barely more than a girl, clutched her baby tighter, but her arms trembled with weakness. "Get on my horse now," Nantan commanded, gathering both mother and child into his strong arms. The baby whimpered, and the woman sagged against his chest, her strength failing. The sound of hoofbeats announced the arrival of several soldiers who had noticed his departure. They reined in their horses, watching the scene unfold with smirks and poorly concealed disdain. "Look at that!" one soldier called out, his voice thick with mockery. "The Apache's playing hero to a white woman." Another soldier spat in the dust. "Ain't that sweet? Regular knight in buckskin armor." Nantan's expression remained unchanged, his eyes hard as flint, as he lifted the woman onto his broad-backed Mustang. The baby had grown quiet, nestled between its mother's body and his chest. He could feel the woman's shallow breathing against his shoulder as she slipped into unconsciousness. Captain Sheehan rode up, his uniform pristine despite the dusty trail. He surveyed the scene with cold detachment, his thin lips pressed into a disapproving line. "Leave them, Scout," he ordered. "We don't have time for strays." Nantan met the captain's gaze without flinching. The Apache's voice was quiet, but carried the weight of steel. "These are not strays. They are people who need help." "That's not your concern," Sheehan replied, his tone dismissive. "We have a schedule to keep." But Nantan had already made his decision. With practiced ease, he swung himself up behind the unconscious woman, cradling her and the infant securely. He turned his horse away from the supply train, pointing toward Apache territory where he knew of a sheltered canyon with fresh water and protection from the wind. "You're making a mistake," Sheehan called after him, but Nantan didn't look back. The captain's voice faded as he addressed his men. "Let him go. We've got supplies to deliver." The soldiers shook their heads, already losing interest in what they saw as a foolish gesture. They couldn't understand the oath that burned in Nantan's heart, the promise he'd made long ago to never again stand idle while an innocent life hung in the balance. As Nantan guided his horse carefully down the trail, he felt the woman stir slightly. Her eyes opened for a moment, clouded with fever and fear. "Why?" she managed to whisper. Nantan adjusted the quilt around the baby, ensuring the child was protected from the biting wind. "Because it is right," he answered simply, knowing she probably wouldn't remember his words. The supply train disappeared behind a bend in the trail, the sound of wagon wheels and horses fading into the winter silence. Nantan knew his decision would have consequences. The army didn't take kindly to their scouts acting independently, and helping a white woman would raise questions he wasn't ready to answer. But as he felt the tiny flutter of the baby's breath against his arm, he knew with certainty that he'd chosen the only path his conscience would allow. The sun painted long shadows across the rocky terrain as Nantan guided his horse toward the small Apache camp nestled at the base of the San Francisco peaks. The mountains loomed above them, their snow-capped summits catching the last golden rays of daylight. Clara's fever-warm body sagged against him, her baby bundled tight against her chest. Smoke from cooking fires drifted skyward as they approached. Children playing among the wickiups stopped to stare, their dark eyes wide with curiosity. The camp dogs barked an alert, bringing several elders out of their dwellings. Nantan called out in Apache, announcing his presence. The elders gathered in a loose circle, their weathered faces showing clear concern at the sight of the unconscious white woman. An older man stepped forward, his silver hair gleaming in the fading light. "You bring trouble to our camp, Nantan," he said in Apache, his voice gravelly with age. Nantan dismounted carefully, still supporting Clara and her child. "I bring those who need our help," he replied firmly. "Would you have me leave them to die in the winter cold?" The elders exchanged glances, but none could challenge the authority in Nantan's voice. He had earned their respect through years of service to the tribe, and his word carried weight. A woman emerged from the gathering crowd. Naiche, the tribe's respected midwife and healer, moved forward with purpose. Her silver-streaked hair was bound in a traditional style, and her dark eyes held wisdom earned through decades of caring for the sick and injured. "Bring them to my wickiup," she commanded, already turning to prepare a space. "The child's breath sounds weak." Nantan carried Clara and the baby into Naiche's dwelling. The interior was warm from a small fire, the air fragrant with drying herbs. He laid Clara gently on a bed of soft furs, while Naiche knelt beside them, her practiced hands checking the baby's temperature. "The little one struggles to breathe," Naiche murmured, pressing her ear to the infant's chest. "The cold has settled in their lungs." Outside, the elders had gathered around the main council fire. Nantan joined them, knowing they deserved an explanation. The flames cast dancing shadows across their faces as he spoke. "Her name is Clara Bellamy," he began, his voice carrying in the evening quiet. "I found her half-frozen in the brush, clutching her child. Her husband was a prospector." One of the elders leaned forward. "Was?" Nantan nodded solemnly. "She spoke briefly during our ride. He died searching for a spring that was said to have healing waters. She had been sick during her pregnancy, and he believed the spring would save her." Recognition flickered across the elders' faces. They knew of such a spring hidden in the contested lands to the north, lands the railroad men had been eyeing with increasing interest. "The same waters the Iron Horsemen seek," an elder woman said softly. "They send their enforcers to pressure us, claiming the land holds no sacred value." From inside the wickiup came a sudden cry of distress. Nantan rose quickly, ducking through the entrance to find Clara awake, trying to sit up despite her weakness. Her eyes were wide with panic as she reached for her baby, who lay in Naiche's careful hands. "My child," Clara gasped, her voice hoarse. "Something's wrong. The breathing—" Nantan knelt beside her, his presence steady and reassuring. "Be still," he said gently. "You are among friends. This is Naiche, our most skilled healer." Clara's frightened gaze darted between them, but something in Nantan's calm demeanor seemed to reach her. Her shoulders relaxed slightly, though her eyes remained fixed on her baby. "The little one needs medicine," Naiche explained, her English careful but clear. "But more than that, they need the warm, moist air that rises from the healing springs." "The springs," Clara whispered. "John, my husband. He was looking for them when—" Her voice broke. Nantan placed a strong hand on her shoulder. "Rest now. When the sun rises, we will ride for the springs. I give you my word, both you and your child will be cared for." Clara searched his face in the dim firelight, perhaps seeing for the first time the depth of compassion behind his stoic exterior. She nodded slowly, allowing Naiche to settle her back onto the furs. Outside, the council fire burned low as the elders reached their decision. When Nantan emerged from the wickiup, they called him over. "The woman and her child may stay," the silver-haired elder announced. "They are under your protection, Nantan. But remember, these are troubled times. The railroad men grow bold, and helping a white woman may bring unwanted attention to our camp." Nantan accepted their words with a respectful nod. As the others dispersed for the night, he remained by the fire, watching the flames dance. The weight of responsibility settled around his shoulders like a familiar blanket. He had chosen this path, and he would see it through no matter the cost. Dawn painted the eastern sky in pale gold as Nantan worked quietly in the crisp morning air. His skilled hands lashed sturdy poles together with leather straps, crafting a travois that would carry Clara and her sick infant. The Apache camp stirred around him, women tending breakfast fires while children helped gather medicinal herbs for the journey under Naiche's watchful eye. Clara sat propped against a sun-warmed boulder, holding her baby close. The child's breathing remained shallow and labored, each tiny wheeze tightening the worry lines around Clara's eyes. Her own fever had risen during the night, leaving a flush high on her cheeks. "The mission church lies 2 days' ride to the north," Nantan explained as he secured soft furs across the wooden frame. "Preacher Walker will help us." "You trust this preacher?" Clara's voice was hoarse with fever. Nantan nodded, checking the bindings one final time. "Elias Walker is a man of true honor. The Apache people call him Speaker of Truth. He understands both worlds." With gentle efficiency, Nantan helped Clara and the baby settle onto the travois. He attached it to his sturdy Mustang, which stood patient and sure-footed. The morning sun had barely cleared the mountains when they set out, leaving the safety of the Apache camp behind. Their progress was slow but steady. Nantan chose the smoothest paths, mindful of every jolt that might disturb his passengers. He led his horse on foot, scanning the terrain ahead while keeping close watch on Clara's condition. Her fever made her drift in and out of awareness, but her arms never loosened their protective hold on her child. By mid-morning, dust on the horizon caught Nantan's attention. He guided the horse into the shelter of a rocky outcropping, his experienced eyes counting the approaching riders. 4 army soldiers on patrol, led by a familiar figure that made Nantan's jaw tighten. Captain Sheehan. The patrol spotted them quickly. Hoofbeats thundered closer as Sheehan urged his mount forward, his face darkening with recognition. The other soldiers spread out behind him, hands resting near their weapons. "Well, well," Sheehan's voice dripped with contempt. "If it isn't our wayward scout. Stealing army supplies now, are we? That woman was found on military-controlled land." Nantan stood his ground, one hand resting protectively on the travois. "Clara Bellamy is under Apache protection. We traveled to the mission for medical care." "The woman is trespassing on restricted territory," Sheehan snapped. He shifted in his saddle, gesturing to one of his men. "The child will be taken into military custody for proper care. Jenkins, get the baby." Clara clutched her infant tighter, trying to sit up despite her weakness. "No, please, ... The soldier named Jenkins started forward, but Nantan moved to block his path, His voice rang out clear and firm in the morning air. By the Treaty of 1868, Article 7, any person under formal Apache protection cannot be removed without tribal council consent. Clara Bellamy and her child are now under that protection. Silence fell across the group. The soldiers exchanged uncertain glances, while Sheehan's face flushed red with anger. "You can't possibly—" "The treaty is clear," Nantan continued, his calm tone carrying an edge of steel. "You may confirm this with Indian Affairs. Until then, we will proceed to the mission church where Preacher Walker can witness our claim." Sheehan's hand tightened on his reins until his knuckles showed white. The other soldiers waited, tension crackling in the air like lightning before a storm. Finally, the captain spat in the dust. "This isn't over," he growled. "I'll have officers waiting at the mission. That woman and child are Army business." "The treaty stands," Nantan replied simply. With a sharp gesture, Sheehan wheeled his horse around. The patrol followed, kicking up dust as they rode away. Only when they had disappeared from sight did Nantan return to Clara's side. She looked up at him, her fever-bright eyes filled with questions. "How did you know about that treaty?" "A man must know the laws that bind both sides," Nantan answered, checking that the travois hadn't been disturbed during the confrontation. "Preacher Walker taught me to read the treaties years ago. Knowledge can be as strong as any weapon." Clara reached out weakly, catching his hand. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." Nantan squeezed her hand gently before returning to his position at the horse's head. They needed to make good time now. Sheehan wouldn't stay quiet about this confrontation. The simple act of mercy that had begun with finding a woman and child in the wilderness had grown into something larger, threatening to draw attention from authorities on both sides of the territorial line. As they resumed their careful journey north, Nantan's mind turned to Preacher Walker. The old circuit rider had spent decades building trust between settlers and tribes. They would need his wisdom now more than ever. Shadows stretched long across the dusty ground as Nantan guided his horse toward the weathered wooden cross that marked the mission church. The simple building stood silhouetted against the darkening sky, its whitewashed walls glowing faintly in the last light of day. A single lamp burned in the window, a beacon of hope after their long journey. The door opened before they reached it, spilling warm lamplight onto the packed earth. Preacher Elias Walker's tall figure filled the doorway, his gray hair catching the golden light. His keen eyes took in the scene quickly, Nantan leading his tired horse, the travois bearing Clara and her infant. "Bring them inside, quickly now," Walker called out, his voice carrying the gentle authority that had earned him respect across the territory. He hurried down the wooden steps, his worn boots raising small puffs of dust. Nantan helped Clara sit up, noting how she trembled with exhaustion. The baby whimpered softly, its breathing still labored in the cool evening air. Walker reached them in 3 long strides, his weathered hands steady as he helped lift Clara from the travois. "Lord above, she's burning with fever," the preacher muttered, supporting most of her weight. Clara's head lolled against his shoulder, her eyes glazed and unfocused. "There's a bed ready in the back room. Sarah's been keeping it warm since we spotted you coming down the valley." Together they carried Clara through the church's main room, past rough-hewn pews that had hosted both settler and Apache congregations. The back room was small but clean, with a narrow bed covered in patchwork quilts. A pot-bellied stove in the corner gave off welcome heat, and an oil lamp cast soft light across the whitewashed walls. Clara collapsed onto the bed as soon as they laid her down, still clutching her baby. Sarah, the preacher's wife, appeared with a basin of cool water and clean cloths, her face creased with concern. She shooed the men out, promising to make Clara and the baby comfortable. In the church's small kitchen, Walker poured thick black coffee into tin cups. The familiar aroma filled the room as Nantan settled his tall frame onto a wooden chair, his muscles aching from the long day's walk. The preacher's face was grave as he sat across the scarred table. "I've heard troubling news," Walker said, his voice low. "The railroad's been busy while I was away on my circuit. They've gotten to the land office officials, bribes, threats, whatever works. They're systematically nullifying water claims all through this territory. Nantan's hand tightened around his cup. The spring Clara's husband found? Walker nodded grimly. Same region. Railroad wants those water rights for their planned route. They're calling all previous claims improperly filed and invalidating them one by one. He took a long sip of coffee before continuing. That's not all. There's medicine that could help. Fever powders and tinctures that a traveling doctor left behind. But they're locked up tight in Fort Wingate's infirmary. They will demand a price, Nantan stated flatly. Already have. Walker's voice held carefully controlled anger. They'll release the medicine, but only if Clara formally surrenders custody of her child to Army care. They're claiming she's unfit, alone out here with no means of support. Nantan's jaw tightened, the muscles standing out along his cheekbone. The tin cup creaked in his grip as he set it down with deliberate care. Surrender is not an option. No, it surely isn't, Walker agreed, his eyes sharp under his gray brows. But we need to think carefully about our next move. That fever's getting worse, and the baby needs help soon. From the back room came the sound of Clara coughing, followed by Sarah's soothing murmur. Nantan rose and walked to the window, staring out at the darkness gathering around the mission. The stars were beginning to appear, cold and distant in the purple sky. There are other medicines, he said finally, Apache remedies that could help, if we had time to gather them. Walker leaned forward, his elbows on the table. The Army won't give us that time. Captain Sheehan's already sent word. They'll be here by noon tomorrow with papers demanding Clara appear before the fort's commander. The treaty protection holds, Nantan insisted. It should, Walker sighed, running a hand through his gray hair. But you know how these things go. They'll tie it up in official reviews and military channels while Clara and her baby suffer. We need to find another way. Sarah appeared in the doorway, her face worried. The baby's fever is rising, she reported quietly. Clara's not much better. They both need real medicine soon. Nantan turned from the window, his expression set. The lamplight cast deep shadows across his features as he looked at Walker. Then we will find it, without surrendering anyone to the Army's care. The preacher studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I reckon we will at that, he said softly. I reckon we surely will. The oil lamp cast flickering shadows on the mission's kitchen walls as Nantan and Preacher Walker bent over scattered papers. Their voices stayed low, mindful of Clara resting in the back room. The night air grew colder, seeping through the window frames, but neither man noticed, absorbed in their urgent planning. Here, Walker said, pulling a yellowed document from the stack. I kept a copy of the original treaty papers. The Army thinks these were lost years ago, but I've held on to them. His finger traced down the faded ink. This section specifically mentions tribal stewardship of water sources within 20 miles of the reservation boundary. Nantan leaned closer, his dark eyes intent. The spring Clara's husband found falls right within that range. Walker spread out a rough-drawn map beside the treaty papers. The railroad men know it too. That's why they've been so keen to bury these documents in red tape and official reviews. But the original signatures are still clear as day. This could force them to acknowledge Apache rights to the water, Nantan said, his voice holding a rare note of hope. Walker nodded, running a hand through his gray hair. If we can get it in front of the right people. Problem is, Fort Wingate's commander has been dodging my requests for months. Won't even grant me a proper meeting. Then we bring the meeting to him. Nantan's expression hardened with determination. With Clara and the child present, they cannot ignore us. It's risky, Walker cautioned. Clara's barely strong enough to sit up, let alone travel. The risk of doing nothing is greater. Their discussion continued through the dark hours, planning every detail. As false dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, Sarah appeared with fresh coffee and worry etched on her face. "Clara's awake," she reported. "The baby took some milk, but that fever's not breaking. They both need real medicine soon." The men shared a grave look. Walker gathered the treaty papers carefully, tucking them into an oilskin packet. "Best tell her what we're planning." They found Clara propped against pillows in the back room, her face pale but determined. The baby lay bundled against her chest, making small, distressed sounds. When Walker explained their intention to ride for Fort Wingate, her eyes sparked with fierce hope. "I'll go," she said, her voice hoarse but firm. "They need to see us, see my child. I won't let them pretend we don't exist." "The journey will be hard," Nantan warned gently. Clara's chin lifted. "Harder than watching my baby suffer while medicine sits locked away? I can manage." Sarah tried to protest, but Clara's determination won out. While the women prepared for the journey, Nantan went to ready the horses. The morning air bit cold and sharp as he worked in the pre-dawn light, modifying his saddle with extra padding and support. Walker joined him carrying supplies. "I've sent word ahead to some friends in the fort's civilian quarter. They'll be watching for us." Nantan nodded, testing the strength of a newly added strap. "Good. We may need witnesses." The sun was just clearing the horizon when they helped Clara mount. Nantan had crafted a clever arrangement of blankets and straps that would let her hold the baby securely while staying balanced in the saddle. Her face was drawn with pain, but her back was straight as she settled the infant against her. "The fort's a 4-hour ride," Walker said, swinging onto his own horse. "We'll take it slow and steady." Sarah pressed a package of food and a flask of water into Clara's hands. "God be with you," she whispered, stepping back. Nantan mounted his horse, positioning himself on Clara's left, while Walker took the right. With a final nod to Sarah, they urged their horses forward, setting out at a careful pace along the trail to Fort Wingate. The morning was clear and cold, their breath frosting in the air. Clara swayed slightly at first, but soon found her balance. The baby stayed quiet, wrapped warm against the chill. They rode in silence, saving their strength for what lay ahead. Nantan kept a watchful eye on both trail and riders. Every so often he would guide his horse closer to Clara's, steadying her when the path grew rough. Her face showed the strain of travel, but her eyes remained fixed forward, burning with the same determination that had answered their plan with "I'll go." The sun climbed higher as they rode, burning off the morning frost. Walker pulled out the oilskin packet occasionally, double-checking the treaty papers were secure. Each time his expression grew more resolved. Clara's voice, though weak, carried clearly in the crisp air. "My husband died believing in that spring's power to save us. I won't let them steal it away and bury the truth in their filing cabinets." "No," Nantan agreed quietly. "We will not." They continued on, 3 riders and a baby moving steadily toward Fort Wingate, where medicine and justice waited behind locked doors. Their shadows stretched out before them on the trail, pointing the way forward like arrows of purpose. The afternoon sun cast long shadows as the small party made their way across the rugged terrain. Clara's strength began to waver, and Walker suggested they make camp while daylight remained. Nantan found a sheltered spot near a stand of juniper trees, where the ground dipped slightly to block the worst of the wind. "We'll rest here," he announced, helping Clara down from her horse. Her legs trembled as she clutched her baby close, but her eyes showed silent gratitude. Walker unpacked their meager supplies while Nantan gathered dry branches for a fire. The flames soon crackled, pushing back the growing chill. Clara settled on a blanket near the warmth, checking her baby's forehead with gentle fingers. "The fever seems a touch cooler," she said softly. "Maybe the fresh air helps." Nantan handed her a tin cup of hot tea and a small portion of dried meat. "You must keep up your strength," he said, his deep voice carrying quiet authority. As the sky darkened to purple, Walker took first watch, moving to higher ground with his rifle. Clara watched Nantan tend the fire. noting how his movements were both efficient and graceful despite his imposing size. Something in his careful attention to her comfort stirred her curiosity. "You understand so well what we're facing," she said carefully. "It's more than just knowing the law, isn't it?" Nantan was still for a long moment, staring into the flames. When he spoke, his voice carried old pain. "Yes, I had a wife once, Sarah. She was white, like you." Clara drew her blanket closer, sensing the weight of his words. "What happened to her?" "She owned good land with a year-round spring." His jaw tightened. "But certain men wanted it. They found ways to challenge her claim, saying a woman married to an Apache had no proper rights to white man's property." He added a stick to the fire, watching it catch. The courts delayed and delayed. Sarah grew sick that winter, but no doctor would come to treat an Indian's wife. The baby made a small sound, and Clara soothed it automatically, her eyes fixed on Nantan's face. "She died?" He nodded once sharply. "I watched her fade, day by day, while men in offices shuffled papers and found reasons to do nothing." His hands clenched. "I did nothing too. Followed their rules, waited for their justice. It never came." "That's why you acted so quickly when you found us," Clara said softly. "I made a vow at Sarah's grave. Never again would I stand idle while someone suffered under such cruelty." He met Clara's eyes across the fire. "When I saw you in the snow, holding your child, I knew this was my chance to keep that promise." The night deepened around them, stars emerging in the vast sky. Clara absorbed Nantan's story, understanding now the fierce protection he offered. "Your wife would be proud," she said finally. "You're honoring her memory by helping us." Before Nantan could respond, Walker called down from his post. "Storm coming!" Big one by the look of those clouds. They quickly gathered their supplies as the wind began to rise. Nantan spotted a rocky overhang nearby and led them to its shelter just as the first heavy drops fell. Thunder rolled across the sky as they huddled beneath the stone, Walker stringing a tarp to block the worst of the rain. Clara held her baby close, humming softly as the storm raged. To her surprise, the infant's breathing seemed easier, less labored than before. "Look," she whispered to Nantan, some colors coming back to her cheeks. He touched the baby's forehead with gentle fingers. "The fever is lower. She fights like her mother." The storm's fury gradually eased to a steady rain. Walker dozed against his saddle, while Clara rested with her baby in the driest spot. Nantan kept watch, his broad shoulders a solid barrier between them and the weather. In the deepest part of night, when only the occasional lightning flash lit the sky, Clara heard Nantan speaking quietly in Apache. Though she couldn't understand the words, their cadence suggested a prayer or promise. Then he switched to English, his voice barely above a whisper. "I renew my vow, Creator. This woman and child are under my protection. If the army stands in our way, so be it. I will not fail them as I failed Sarah." He touched the medicine pouch at his neck. "Let my strength be enough this time." Clara kept her eyes closed, deeply moved by his words. She understood now that their journey was about more than just her rights or the spring. For Nantan, it was a chance to heal an old wound, to stand against injustice where once he had been powerless. The rain continued its gentle pattern, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate. Under the stone overhang, two people from different worlds found common ground in their shared determination to see justice done. Clara drifted to sleep, feeling safer than she had since her husband's death, while Nantan maintained his vigil, true to his renewed vow. The midday sun beat down mercilessly as their small party approached Fort Wingate's weathered gates. Clara sat straighter in her saddle, drawing strength from Nantan's steady presence beside her. Her baby, wrapped close against her chest, stirred fitfully in the heat. Two sentries snapped to attention as they neared. "Halt and state your business," one called out, his rifle held ready but not aimed. Walker urged his horse forward. We seek audience with Colonel Maddox on urgent treaty matters." The sentry's eyes narrowed at the sight of Nantan, but he dispatched his partner to relay the message. Minutes stretched like hours as they waited under the scorching sun. Finally, the gates creaked open. Inside the fort's walls, activity ceased as soldiers and civilians alike stared at their unusual group. Clara felt their questioning gazes but kept her chin high. A corporal approached, his boots raising small clouds of dust from the packed earth. "Colonel Maddox will grant you 1 hour," he announced crisply. "Follow me to the hearing tent." They dismounted near a large canvas pavilion erected on the parade ground. Clara's legs threatened to buckle, but Nantan's strong hand steadied her elbow. She clutched her precious bundle closer, drawing courage from her child's warmth. Inside the tent, afternoon light filtered through the canvas, casting everything in a muted golden glow. A rough wooden table served as the colonel's desk, with several chairs arranged before it. Along the sides, railroad men in dark suits watched with predatory interest. Clara recognized Griggs among them, his smooth face twisted in a barely concealed sneer. Colonel Maddox sat ramrod straight behind his makeshift desk, his gray mustache precisely trimmed, and his uniform immaculate despite the heat. His eyes, sharp as a hawk's, assessed each member of their party in turn. "Preacher Walker," he acknowledged with a slight nod, "you've brought quite a controversial group to my door." "Colonel," Walker replied, setting his worn leather satchel on the table, "we come seeking justice under the law, both military and tribal." Maddox's eyebrow lifted slightly. "Indeed? And what law supports harboring a woman of questionable status on restricted lands?" Before Walker could respond, Clara stepped forward. Though her voice trembled slightly, her words rang clear. "My status, sir, is that of a widow seeking to claim what my husband died to find, water rights guaranteed under treaty." A murmur rippled through the assembled men. Griggs pushed away from the tent wall, his boots scraping the wooden platform. "Colonel, surely we're not entertaining this farce. The woman's clearly been coerced by the Apache." "I have not been coerced," Clara cut in, her voice stronger now. "I have been protected, saved, when others would have left me and my child to die." Walker seized the moment to withdraw several age-yellowed documents from his satchel. "These treaty scrolls, Colonel, specifically address water rights in the contested territories. Article 7 clearly states that natural springs are to be considered community resources, available to all settlers who file proper claim, with special consideration given to those with young children." Colonel Maddox accepted the documents, examining them with careful attention. His fingers traced the faded ink as Griggs shifted impatiently. "Colonel, newer surveys supersede these outdated agreements," Griggs interjected smoothly. The railroads claim, Nantan spoke for the first time, his deep voice filling the tent, "is built on broken promises and corrupted papers." Several of the railroad men surged forward, but Maddox raised his hand sharply. "Order! This is a military hearing, not a saloon brawl." Clara reached into her shawl and withdrew a folded paper, creased and worn but carefully preserved. "My husband's map, Colonel. He marked the spring's location here, following all proper procedures for filing claim. Her voice caught for a moment. "He died trying to secure a future for our child." Maddox studied the map, comparing it to the treaty documents. The tent grew still, heavy with tension and unspoken threats. Clara could feel Griggs' cold stare, but she kept her eyes on the colonel, praying he would see the truth. "These documents appear to be in order," Maddox said finally, his tone measured. "However, given the complex nature of current land disputes, I will need time to verify their authenticity and jurisdiction." "Time my child may not have," Clara said softly, but with steel in her voice. The baby stirred again, letting out a weak cry that echoed in the tense silence. Walker stepped forward again. "Colonel, we're not asking for final judgment today. But these documents at least warrant a full hearing and immediate medical attention for the child while the matter is reviewed." Maddox's eyes moved from Clara to her baby, then to Nantan's stoic face, and finally to the railroad men gathered, like vultures along the tent's edge. The weight of the decision was visible in the set of his shoulders, the law he served pulling against the politics he faced. Colonel Maddox cleared his throat. "Very well. Let's proceed with the arguments." Griggs stepped forward, his polished boots clicking on the wooden platform. "Colonel, this is quite simple. The railroad has legal survey rights to these territories. This woman's claim, based on her deceased husband's adventures, holds no water." He smirked at his own jest. "That spring held enough water to save lives," Clara countered, her voice steady despite her weakness. "And what qualifies you to manage such a resource?" Another railroad man sneered. "A widow? Alone? With a sickly infant? You can barely stand, much less work the land." Nantan moved forward, his shadow falling across the speaker. The man's words died in his throat as he looked up at the Apache scout's stern face. The tent grew quiet, save for the whisper of wind through canvas. Walker seized the moment. "Colonel, if I may." He opened his worn Bible, its pages marked with dried flowers and pressed leaves. Psalm 24 reminds us, "The earth is the Lord's and everything in it." We are called to be stewards, not owners. This spring, by treaty and by divine providence, belongs to all who would nurture it. "Religious sentiment has no place in property law," Griggs scoffed. "But human dignity does," a new voice spoke up. Lieutenant Harris stepped forward from among the junior officers. His uniform was crisp, his face young but determined. "Colonel, permission to testify?" Maddox nodded, interest flickering in his eyes. "Sir, I've witnessed firsthand our failure to honor treaty obligations regarding water rights. 3 months ago, I documented 7 cases where Apache families were denied access to traditional water sources. Our own reports show these springs have sustained communities for generations." Griggs' face darkened. "Lieutenant, you overstep. I speak as an officer of the United States Army." Harris continued firmly. "Our duty is to uphold the law, all of it, including treaties. Mrs. Bellamy's claim aligns with both treaty provisions and basic human decency." Clara swayed slightly, and Nantan's steady hand found her elbow again. The baby whimpered, and she pressed a cool hand to its fevered brow. "The woman can barely stay upright," one of the railroad men muttered. "How can she possibly—" "I stand because I must," Clara cut in, her voice carrying unexpected strength. "I stand for my child, for my husband's dream, for what's right." She took a shaky step forward, facing Colonel Maddox directly. "My husband believed in the law, sir. He believed that if he followed every rule, filed every paper correctly, the system would protect us. He died believing that." Her voice caught, but she pressed on. "I'm not asking for charity. I'm not even asking for justice for him anymore. I'm asking for a future for my child." The tent fell silent as Clara continued, her words gaining strength. "That spring isn't just water to us. It's life, hope, a chance for something better." She glanced at Nantan, then back to Maddox. "I've learned that the land doesn't care what color your skin is, or what language you pray in. It gives life to all who respect it." She swayed again, more pronouncedly this time. Lieutenant Harris quickly brought forward a chair, but Clara waved it away. "The railroad men speak of progress," she said, her voice growing fainter but no less passionate. "But what kind of progress tramples the weak? What kind of civilization builds its rails on broken promises and children's tears?" The baby coughed, and Clara's knees finally buckled. Nantan caught her before she could fall, easing her into the chair Harris had brought. The tent erupted in concerned murmurs. Colonel Maddox stood abruptly. "This hearing will recess for 1 hour." His voice was gruff, but his face showed signs of being moved. "Lieutenant Harris, escort Mrs. Bellamy to the infirmary. See that she and the child receive care." He held up a hand as Griggs started to protest. "That's an order, not a suggestion." As Harris helped Clara to her feet, she caught the colonel's eye. "Thank you, sir." Maddox nodded curtly, but his expression had softened. "We'll reconvene when you're stronger, Mrs. Bellamy. These matters—" He glanced at the treaty documents, then at the railroad men's angry faces. "Require careful consideration." The tent slowly emptied, leaving Walker and Nantan standing together. The preacher's weathered face bore a cautious smile. "The Lord works in mysterious ways," he murmured. Nantan watched Clara being led toward the infirmary, his expression unreadable, but his eyes bright with something that might have been hope. "The heart speaks louder than any law," he replied softly. "Even the colonel must hear it." Outside the hearing tent, Judge Maddox pulled Preacher Walker aside, their boots crunching on the frozen ground. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Fort Wingate's parade ground. "Walk with me, Preacher," Maddox said, his voice low. They moved away from curious ears toward a quiet corner near the fort's wooden walls. "I reckon you know what's coming," the judge said, removing his hat to wipe his brow despite the winter chill. "The treaty is clear as day, now that you've brought it to light. I'll have to rule in the widow's favor." Walker nodded, but noticed the concern etched in Maddox's weathered face. "There's more weighing on your mind, Judge. Griggs and his railroad men, they don't take defeat gracefully." Maddox glanced over his shoulder. "They've got money invested, promises made. Men like that, they don't let go of what they want, law or no law." "You fear retribution," Walker said quietly. "I fear what desperate men might do when fortunes are at stake." Maddox's eyes were grave. "That woman and her child will need protection. Your Apache friend, he seems capable." "Nantan has already pledged his life to their safety," Walker assured him. Meanwhile, in the infirmary, Nantan stood near Clara's cot. The army doctor had given her child medicine, and already the baby's breathing seemed easier. Clara's own color had improved after rest and water. "The judge will rule in our favor," Nantan said softly, his usual stoic expression softened by concern. Clara looked up at him, hope warring with worry in her eyes. "Then why do you look troubled?" "Because victory in court does not always mean peace follows." He knelt beside her cot, his voice dropping lower. "The railroad men, they are like wolves. When hunting fails, they circle, waiting for weakness. You think they'll come after us?" Clara clutched her baby closer. "I think you must be prepared. Your legal right to the spring will mean nothing to men who respect only money and power." Nantan's dark eyes met hers steadily. "But you will not face them alone." The tent flaps rustled as a young soldier appeared. "They're reconvening, ma'am." Clara rose carefully, cradling her child. Nantan's strong hand steadied her elbow as they walked back to the hearing tent. The crowd had grown, with more Apache witnesses gathering at the edges, and even townspeople from nearby settlements arriving to hear the verdict. Judge Maddox stood at the makeshift bench, his face stern. The railroad men clustered on one side, Griggs's expression dark with barely contained rage. On the other side, Lieutenant Harris stood at attention, while Walker took his place near Clara and Nantan. "Having reviewed the evidence and treaty documents," Maddox began, his voice carrying to every corner of the tent, "this court finds the following. First, that the spring in question lies within lands governed by the Treaty of 1868, which explicitly guarantees water rights to both tribal members and legitimate settlers who work in harmony with tribal interests." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Griggs' jaw clenched visibly. Second, that Mrs. Clara Bellamy, through her late husband's claim and her demonstrated intent to honor tribal sovereignty, qualifies as such a settler. Maddox paused, meeting Clara's eyes. Third, that the protection of vital water sources for community use takes precedence over commercial development claims. Several Apache elders nodded solemnly. Walker squeezed Clara's shoulder gently. Therefore, this court grants Mrs. Bellamy temporary guardianship of the spring to be held in trust with tribal oversight. Furthermore, she and her child are hereby placed under the protection of tribal sovereignty as guaranteed by treaty law. The tent erupted in cheers. Apache witnesses embraced each other, while several soldiers, including Lieutenant Harris, broke into spontaneous applause. Clara's eyes filled with tears of relief as she hugged her baby close. But not everyone celebrated. Griggs and his men huddled together, exchanging glances that promised trouble. One railroad enforcer spat on the ground before storming out. Griggs himself stared at Clara with cold calculation before following his men. "Mrs. Bellamy," the army doctor called from the tent entrance. "We should complete the child's treatment. There's still medicine to administer." Clara nodded, then turned to Nantan. "Will you come?" "I must speak with Walker first," he replied, "but I will join you soon." His eyes scanned the dispersing crowd, noting which railroad men lingered and which directions they took. As Clara followed the doctor toward the infirmary, Walker approached Nantan. "The judge warned me," the preacher said quietly. "Griggs won't let this rest." "No," Nantan agreed, watching Clara's retreating form. "The real fight begins now." His hand rested instinctively on his knife hilt. "But they will find an Apache warrior's oath is stronger than their greed." Around them, the fort buzzed with activity as news of the verdict spread. Apache witnesses mounted their horses, carrying word back to their camps. Soldiers returned to their posts, some nodding respectfully to Nantan as they passed. And in the shadows between buildings, railroad men whispered and plotted, their anger simmering like storm clouds on the horizon. The winter sun had dipped behind the San Francisco peaks when Clara, Nantan, and Preacher Walker arrived back at the mission church. The rough-hewn building stood silhouetted against the purple evening sky, its weather-beaten cross a stark reminder of sanctuary in harsh times. Inside, Clara settled her baby in a makeshift cradle, fashioned from a wooden crate padded with quilts. The medicine from Fort Wingate had worked wonders. The infant's breathing was stronger, and pink had returned to the tiny cheeks. "Much obliged for the hospitality, preacher," Clara said, watching Walker stoke the pot-bellied stove. The iron door creaked as he added another log, sending warmth through the church's single room. "This house of God turns no one away," Walker replied, stirring a pot of bean soup hanging over the flames. The aroma of cornbread baking in the Dutch oven filled the air. Nantan stood at the window, his tall frame rigid with alertness. His eyes constantly scanned the deepening shadows beyond the churchyard. Years of scouting had taught him to trust his instincts, and something felt wrong in the gathering darkness. The sound of approaching hoofbeats broke the evening quiet. A young Apache rider, barely 16, dismounted in a cloud of dust. His chest heaved as he burst through the door. "Riders coming!" he gasped in Apache, then switched to English for the others. "Many men with guns. Railroad men sent them. They talk of burning you out." Nantan's hand went to his knife. "How many?" "Maybe 15. Led by the one called Griggs." The scout's eyes were wide. "They ride hard and mean." Walker set down his cooking spoon, his face grim. "They mean to take the law into their own hands." Clara clutched her baby to her chest, but her voice remained steady. "What do we do?" "We stand," Nantan said simply. His dark eyes met Clara's. "This church has thick walls. We can defend it." As if in answer to his words, horses approached from the east. 3 riders emerged from the gloom, Lieutenant Harris and 2 other soldiers in army blue, their faces troubled. "We deserted our posts," Harris admitted as they dismounted. "Word spread about Griggs gathering hired guns. Couldn't sit by and watch murder done." Walker nodded gravely. "The Lord works in mysterious ways, bringing defenders to his house." More riders appeared, Apache scouts who had witnessed the hearing, then settlers from nearby homesteads who'd heard rumors of trouble. Within an hour, nearly 20 people had gathered at the church, united by conscience against injustice. They worked quickly in the fading light. Nantan directed the fortification efforts, his experience in warfare evident in every command. Wagons were overturned to create barriers. Windows were reinforced with planks. Water barrels were filled, and ammunition was distributed to those with rifles. Clara helped where she could, tearing strips of cloth for bandages while keeping her baby close. The infant slept peacefully, unaware of the storm gathering around them. "Your child sleeps like a warrior," Nantan observed, pausing beside her as he checked the barricades. "Like someone who knows they're protected," Clara replied softly. Their eyes met in understanding, remembering all that had brought them to this moment. Walker moved through the church, offering quiet words of encouragement and prayer to their defenders. The old preacher's calm presence steadied nerves and strengthened resolve. Lieutenant Harris positioned sharpshooters in the church's small bell tower, while Apache scouts took up hidden positions around the perimeter. The mixture of blue coats and traditional garb, of settler and native, spoke volumes about the bonds forged by conscience. As full darkness fell, they could hear distant hoofbeats growing louder. Clara peered through a gap in the planked windows. Torchlight appeared on the trail, revealing mounted figures approaching with purposeful menace. "They're coming," she whispered, but her voice held no fear. Nantan stood beside her, his massive frame blocking most of the window. "We are ready." Walker gathered everyone in the center of the church for a final word. "What we defend here is more than a building," he said, his voice carrying to every corner. "It's the right of a mother to protect her child, the honor of a warrior to keep his word, the duty of all people to stand against injustice." Clara held her baby close, looking at the faces around her. Apache scouts with weathered features, young army deserters barely old enough to shave, settlers who'd chosen conscience over convenience. In their eyes, she saw the same determination she felt in her own heart. The sound of approaching riders grew louder. Torchlight flickered through the gaps in the barricaded windows. Someone whispered a prayer in Apache. A soldier checked his rifle one last time. Clara took her position behind an overturned pew, her baby secured in a protected alcove nearby. Nantan crouched beside her, his presence as solid as the church's stone foundation. Outside, they could hear Griggs' voice calling commands to his men as they surrounded the church. The night air grew thick with tension as their defenders waited in silence, each person committed to their stand. The final confrontation was about to begin. The first shot shattered the night's silence like thunder. Glass exploded inward as bullets pierced the church windows, sending splinters of wood and shards flying through the darkness. The defenders dropped low, seeking cover behind overturned pews and wooden barriers. "Hold steady!" Nantan's voice carried across the church, calm and measured despite the chaos. "Wait for clear targets." Clara pressed herself against the rough wood of an overturned pew, her heart pounding. Her baby, secured in the protected alcove behind her, started crying at the noise. She reached back to touch the infant's hand, offering what comfort she could. Through gaps in the barricades, orange torchlight danced across the churchyard. Dark figures moved between the shadows, trying to find weak points in their defenses. Lieutenant Harris and his men maintained disciplined fire from the bell tower, making the attackers pay for every attempt to advance. "West wall!" someone shouted. The sound of axes striking wood echoed through the church. Nantan directed 3 Apache scouts to reinforce the position, their rifles crackling in response to the threat. The air grew thick with gunsmoke. Walker moved between the defenders, passing out spare ammunition and tending to those grazed by splinters and ricochets. His prayers mixed with the sound of gunfire, steady and reassuring. "They're trying the door!" a settler woman called out, her voice tight with tension. The heavy wooden entrance shuddered under repeated impacts. Nantan's commanding presence seemed to be everywhere at once. He positioned 2 soldiers with clear shots at the door, then helped an injured Apache scout to safer ground. His movements were precise, purposeful, never wasting a motion despite the madness around them. A fresh volley of shots peppered the church. One of Harris's men cried out from the bell tower, clutching his arm. An Apache woman with knowledge of medicine rushed to help him, tearing strips of cloth for bandages. "Running low on ammunition in the tower," Harris called down, his voice strained. "Coming up," Clara said, gathering cartridge boxes. She had just started toward the ladder when a massive crash shook the building. Part of the east wall splintered inward, and through the gap, a torch sailed through the air. "Fire!" Walker shouted, rushing to stamp out the flames before they could spread. More torches followed, forcing defenders to divide their attention between fighting flames and returning fire. The battle had raged for nearly an hour when Griggs's voice boomed from outside. "Last chance to surrender the woman and her brat. Nobody else needs to die tonight." Clara's grip tightened on her rifle. Through the chaos, her eyes met Nantan's across the room. His slight head shake carried volumes of reassurance. They would not yield. A new attack came from multiple directions at once. Bullets zinged through the church in deadly patterns. 3 defenders fell wounded in quick succession. The air filled with shouts, prayers, and the acrid smell of gunpowder. In the confusion, a shadow appeared at the broken east wall. Moonlight glinted off a rifle barrel aimed directly at Clara and the alcove where her baby lay. Time seemed to slow as she saw the gunman's finger tighten on the trigger. "No!" Nantan's roar split the air. His massive frame launched across the space between them, faster than seemed possible for such a large man. He slammed into Clara, knocking her down as the shot cracked out. Hot pain blazed across his shoulder, but his body remained a shield over Clara and her child. Nantan's cry of agony echoed through the church. Blood darkened his shirt, but his eyes burned with fierce determination. The sight of his sacrifice ignited something in the defenders. Lieutenant Harris and his men unleashed a devastating volley from the bell tower. Apache scouts surged forward with war cries that chilled the blood. Settlers and soldiers fought side by side with renewed fury, driving back the attackers from every breach. Clara pressed her hand against Nantan's wound, tears streaming down her face. "Why?" she whispered. Through clenched teeth, Nantan managed a ghost of a smile. "I made a vow," he said simply. Walker appeared beside them with bandages, working quickly to stem the bleeding. "The Lord watches over his faithful," the preacher murmured, tying off the dressing. Outside, the intensity of gunfire began to slacken. Shouts of confusion rose from the attackers as more horses approached from the north. Reinforcements, but not for Griggs. The thunder of cavalry hooves filled the night, accompanied by authoritative voices demanding surrender. Nantan remained conscious despite his wound, his massive body still protectively angled toward Clara and her child. The baby had fallen quiet, as if sensing the gravity of his sacrifice. Blood seeped through his bandages, but his eyes never left the broken wall where the gunman had appeared, ready even now to defend his charges. The sound of fighting diminished, replaced by the calls of army officers taking control of the situation. But inside the church, time seemed suspended in that moment of sacrifice, a moment that had proved the depth of Nantan's commitment and forever sealed the bond between protector and protected. The first rays of dawn crept through the shattered windows of the mission church, painting broken glass with pale gold light. The air still hung heavy with gunsmoke, but the terrible sounds of battle had given way to an almost reverent quiet. Outside, hoofbeats approached at a steady gallop. "Army patrol!" called one of the lookouts. "Flying Fort Wingate's colors!" Lieutenant Harris emerged from the bell tower, his uniform stained with powder burns. He recognized the lead rider and allowed himself a small smile. "Lieutenant Matthews," he said softly. "He chose the right side after all." The reinforcements dismounted in the churchyard, their boots crunching on spent shell casings. Lieutenant Matthews quickly took charge, directing his men to secure the perimeter and apprehend the remaining attackers who hadn't fled. Clara sat near Nantan, who lay on a makeshift pallet while Walker tended his shoulder wound. Her baby slept peacefully in her arms, somehow untouched by the night's violence. She watched as soldiers led away railroad enforcer Griggs and his surviving men in irons, their faces dark with defeated rage. "Ma'am," Lieutenant Matthews approached, removing his hat. We found telegraph orders in Grigg's coat, direct evidence of the railroad's attempts to corrupt local officials. They'll face justice for this." Nantan stirred at these words, his eyes opening. Despite the pain evident in his face, satisfaction flickered in his expression. Clara reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. The morning light strengthened as people began emerging from their defensive positions. Apache scouts helped wounded soldiers to waiting medics. Settler women distributed water and bandages. The divisions that had seemed so rigid before the siege now melted away in the warmth of shared survival. Army doctors worked efficiently, moving from patient to patient. When they reached Nantan, their examination brought relief. The bullet had passed clean through his shoulder. Though the wound was serious, it would heal with time and care. "You saved more than just me and my baby," Clara told him, her voice thick with emotion. "You showed them all how to stand together." The church gradually filled with people from both town and reservation. They came bearing food, medicine, and helping hands. Children helped clear debris while their parents patched windows and righted pews. Prayers in English and Apache mixed freely in the morning air. Lieutenant Harris supervised as his men gathered evidence of the railroad's crimes: coded messages, falsified land documents, proof of bribes paid to corrupt officials. Each piece strengthened the case against them, ensuring their schemes would finally face the light of justice. Clara stood at the church steps, her baby beginning to wake in her arms. She watched the sunrise paint the desert in shades of hope, knowing that while the night's battle was over, its meaning would echo far beyond these walls. Their stand had done more than defeat corrupt men. It had begun to heal old wounds between peoples who had learned to fight as one. Spring rains had softened the desert earth as workers dug irrigation channels from Bellamy Spring. The water flowed clear and sweet, just as Clara's husband had dreamed it would. She stood at the spring's edge, watching her baby sleep peacefully in a cradle board gifted by the Apache women. Nantan approached, his left arm still bound in a sling. His quiet footsteps barely disturbed the morning silence. "The channels reach both settlements now," he said, his deep voice gentle. "Your husband's map showed the true way." Clara nodded, touching the wooden marker that read, "Bellamy Spring" in fresh carved letters. "He would have loved to see this," she whispered. "All these people working together." Down the slope, Apache families worked alongside settler women, showing them how to line the channels with stone to prevent erosion. Children darted between the workers, carrying water and tools where needed. Their laughter rose sweet and clear in the morning air. Preacher Walker appeared, his Bible tucked under one arm and his sleeves rolled up for work. He paused to watch a group of Army engineers surveying the land, their new commander insisting on proper documentation of tribal boundaries. "Colonel Richardson's proving true to his word," Walker observed. "The treaty maps are being redrawn with proper respect to Apache territories." The sound of hammering drew their attention to where new homes were being raised. Apache scouts had shown settlers how to build with adobe brick, stronger against the desert heat than wooden walls. In return, settler women taught new farming techniques that would help both communities through lean times. Clara noticed how Nantan's hand sometimes strayed to his healing shoulder, though he never complained of pain. She'd taken to bringing him medicinal tea, learned from the Apache healers. Their quiet moments together had grown precious, filled with shared glances and gentle words that needed no explanation. "The spring gives life to more than just the land," Walker said softly, watching them. His eyes crinkled with understanding as he saw how Clara and Nantan stood close without touching, their shadows merging in the morning light. Workers called out greetings as they passed, Apache and English mixing freely on their tongues. Where once there had been suspicion, now there were shared meals and trading of skills. Children played games from both cultures, teaching each other words and songs that bridged the old divides. The water flowed steadily through the new channels, reaching fields where corn and beans would soon grow. Like the spring itself, hope had surfaced from hidden places, nourishing something new and precious in the desert soil, a community bound together by more than just necessity. The morning sun painted the desert in shades of gold and amber. Clara's child, now steady enough to toddle, took hesitant steps across the packed earth. Nantan knelt beside his dappled Mustang, his arms outstretched in welcome. His shoulder had healed strong, leaving only a small scar as reminder of that fateful night at the church. "Come, little one," he called softly. The child's face lit up with recognition, small hands reaching toward him. Each wobbly step brought fresh determination, until finally reaching Nantan's waiting embrace. With gentle grace, Nantan lifted the child and spoke the words that had first saved Clara's life. "Get on my horse now." This time they carried no desperation, only joy. The child squealed with delight as Nantan carefully settled them both in the saddle. Clara watched from the porch of her new adobe home, tears streaming freely down her cheeks. These were not tears of grief or fear, but of gratitude for this unexpected family she'd found in the desert. The spring burbled nearby, its clear water a testament to her husband's final dream. Preacher Walker stood beside her, his weathered Bible in hand. "The Lord works in mysterious ways," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "This here's a new beginning, sure as sunrise." Around them, the community went about its morning tasks. Apache women taught settler children to weave baskets, while Army Scouts shared coffee with tribal elders. The railroad's iron tracks now curved respectfully around tribal lands, a daily reminder that justice could prevail when good people stood together. The sound of her child's laughter rang out across the morning air as Nantan guided his horse in a gentle circle. In that moment, watching settler, Apache, and soldier work side by side, Clara knew that compassion had finally triumphed over greed and prejudice. If something in this story whispered to your spirit, stay a while, subscribe, and come back tomorrow. The next story may be the one you didn't know you needed.